welcome to another installment in our series of collaborative project videos between The Wood Whisperer and FindWoodworking.com. Now, I'm your host, Marc Spagnuolo, and today our goal is to make a stable base for our new assembly table. That sucker is heavy, so we need something that can take the weight, but it doesn't need to be elaborate. You could just make a simple base from 2x4s and plywood, but if you're like me and you can always use more storage, this is a great opportunity to get creative and design a functional arrangement of doors and drawers, and I think I'll throw in a few creature comforts in as well. Now, the overall plan is to make a stand that has three main compartments. The first will be a shelf inside of a door, followed by a set of drawers, and then another shelf inside of a door. And because our table's 4 feet wide, we can actually have the design repeated on the other side of the table. So basically doubling our storage. Now, my plan calls for a very simple structure consisting of 4 vertical plywood partitions that are connected with plywood stretchers. Now, the pieces themselves will be constructed using dados and rabbets. And these two joints are fundamental to good cabinet making, so it's well worth our time to review this process. So let's start by cutting the dados in our vertical partitions. Now, with our vertical partitions cut, I numbered them 1 through 4 so that I can keep them in order. Now, it's very easy to cut your dado in the wrong place, so don't be afraid to dummy-proof it. Now, I'm going to cut my dados today using a Dado Blade and a table saw. That's really just my preferred method. Alternatively, you could use a straight edge and a router with a straight bit. Now, if you're not familiar, a Dado Blade is nothing more than a stack of blades that gives you a wider cut than a regular table saw blade. It's really the perfect tool for the job. Now, I have to use shims to get the perfect fit for my plywood. If I set my dado for 3/4 of an inch, the joint will be too loose. This is because plywood these days generally runs about 23/32 seconds of an inch instead of the advertised 3/4 of an inch. So you usually have to use a special combination of chippers and shims to get the perfect fit. Now, at this point, it's very important that we develop a cut strategy. In order to ensure consistency, we should try to do all of our identical cuts at the same time. Once the fence is set, we really don't want to move it until all those cuts are complete. So in the case of our stand here, each vertical partition gets a dado that's 3 inches up from the bottom. So once I set my fence at 3 inches, I'll cut the dado on each board before I move on to the next cut. So let's get started on our dado cuts.
I use a combination of chippers and shims to get the exact width I'm looking for. I then set the fence to 3 inches from the blade and cut all of my bottom dados. I'll then reset the fence to cut my top dados as well. Notice that I'm using an anti-kickback roller to help me keep even pressure where the wood meets the blade.
So now it's time to cut our dados and rabbets for our stretcher pieces. Now, it's critical that our dados and rabbets line up perfectly from stretcher to stretcher because we're relying on them to keep our vertical partitions in proper alignment. Now, if they're off by just a little bit, it's going to cause us trouble down the line. And the best way that I know to ensure accuracy is to cut the joints ahead of time from a larger piece. And then once the dados and rabbets are cut, we can easily rip our 3-inch widths from the larger piece and all of them will be perfect. Now, I would love nothing more than to just cut these dados and rabbets right here on a table saw. And it's tempting, but it's not really a good idea. And whenever you have a piece that is significantly longer this way than it is this way, we've got a high likelihood of kickback. So in order to avoid that, I'm actually just going to use my router with a special plywood bit.
These plywood bits are available from most router bit companies. Not all plywood is exactly 23/30 seconds of an inch, so make sure you cut a few test joints first. I use my router with an edge guide to cut the rabbets on both sides of the board. Then, using a clamping straight edge, I cut the 2 inside dados. With the 2 dados and the 2 rabbets cut, I can now rip our 3-inch stretcher strips.
So now with all of our dados cut in our vertical partitions, we have to turn our attention to the toe kicks at the bottom of each partition. We need to cut out a 3-inch by 3-inch square from each bottom corner, and the best tool for that is the jigsaw.
I like to use blue tape to help prevent chip out whenever I cut plywood with a jigsaw.
Now, assembling this monster can be a pretty tricky ordeal. The easiest way that I find to do it is with pre-assemblies. So each of the side compartments offers us a good opportunity for a pre-assembly, meaning you would use the 2 partitions and the 2 shelves that go in between, and then once all that's, the glue is dry, things are a little bit more stable, then we can bring the whole piece together using the stretchers. So let's get started with that.
I begin by placing one of the vertical partitions on the floor, and then I spread a generous amount of glue through the entire dado. The shelf drops easily into the dado and I secure it with brad nails while keeping the shelf perpendicular with a speed square. After installing both shelves, I add glue to the dados of the next vertical partition. With a little coercion, the shelves slide right into the dados. Once again, I secure everything with brad nails. With both sub-assemblies completed, it's time to add the stretchers. Yep, you guessed it, glue and brads. And the same treatment for the toe kicks.
So now that the case is built, I'm going to show you how to measure and build the drawers. Let's start with the width. Now, the drawer slides that I'm using here are full extension slides. These guys are a 1/2 inch thick each, so to get our drawer width, we need to subtract 1 inch from the total width of this center compartment. So then if your space is 19 3/4, then the final width of your drawers would be 18 3/4. Now, I measured my vertical space, and it comes out to 24 3/4. I'd like to have a 1/4 inch gap between each drawer, and I also want 4 drawers that increase in depth as they go down. All I need to do now is calculate 4 drawer heights that work with those parameters. The easiest way to do this for me is to draw it out on a piece of scrap. Now I've got all my 1/4 inch gaps here, and the drawers themselves are 4 inches, 5 inches, 6.5 inches, and 8 inches. And finally, we need to determine our depth. Now the total depth across the stand is 38 inches. And since I want my drawers to be on both sides, we only have half of that to work with, so that's 19 inches. Now, the drawer slides that I picked up are 18 inches, so I'll just make my drawers 18 inches, and that'll give me the extra room that I need in the middle to run things like cords and air hoses through the stand later on. Now, my drawers themselves will be made from 3/4 inch birch ply on the sides, and they'll have 1/2 inch birch ply bottoms. These drawers are going to hold a lot of power tools, so I want to make sure that they're going to stand up to that extra weight. So based on all the numbers we've calculated, we can now cut our drawer parts. Now with all of our drawer parts cut, let's talk about the joinery. Now there's a number of ways that we can make our drawers, from a simple butt joint to a more advanced joinery like dovetails. Now since this is just shop furniture, I'm looking for something that's simple, but I also need it to be strong. So I think the best choice here would probably be a reinforced rabbet. And we're going to start by cutting a 1/2 inch deep rabbet on all of the ends of the front and back pieces. And just a quick note, the final length of your side pieces will vary depending on the type of joinery that you choose. So just plan everything out before you make your final cuts and everything should turn out fine.
To cut the rabbet joints, I'm using a Dado Blade again, but this time with a sacrificial fence. This allows me to safely cut right up to the edge of the board without damaging my fence. I cut the rabbets a 1/2 inch deep and 23/32 of an inch wide.
So now we need to make a 1/4 inch deep dado on all of the inside faces of our drawer pieces, and that's where our 1/2 inch bottom panel is going to go. So now that the joinery is all cut for our drawers, I could do a quick dry assembly, take a couple measurements, and then I have the dimensions for my bottom panel. And don't forget, you take the inside dimension and then add the extra distance for your 2 dados on both sides, and that gives you a perfect number for a perfect fitting panel. Now with all the drawer bottoms cut, we can start assembling our drawers. The one problem I just realized is I don't really have an assembly table yet to work on, so the easiest thing for me to do at this point is clear off the table saw, take the splitter off, put the blade down, and then maybe put a piece of ply on top of everything and use that as a makeshift assembly table.
I lay out all the drawer parts and spread glue in all the dados and rabbets. Next, I drop in the 1/2 inch bottom panel, and then I assemble the rest of the pieces. Next, I shoot brad nails into both sides of each rabbet joint. A speed square helps confirm alignment.
Now, our drawers are going to be hung on full extension slides. And that means that the drawers will extend all the way out, giving us easy access to the items that are way in the back. But for most folks, installing slides like this can be intimidating. But like many things in woodworking, it can be a piece of cake if you just use a systematic approach. As always, let's keep it simple and dummy-proof it. Now let's review what we already know. We know that we want each slide to line up with the bottom of the drawers when they're installed. We also know that we want there to be a 1/4 inch buffer above and below each drawer. And we know that the drawer compartment itself starts 3 inches above the ground. Now I'm going to take all the pain and the frustration out of this installation by using spacers. Here's a 3-inch piece of scrap left over from the stretchers, and then here's a strip of 1/4 inch plywood with veneer tape added so that I can bring it up to exactly a 1/4 inch. Now since we want the bottom of our drawer to be a 1/4 inch above the toe kick, all we need to do is drop in our 3-inch spacer, put our 1/4 inch spacer on top of that, and we've got the perfect height for our drawer slides.
In order to install the slides, I need to separate the slide itself from the drawer bracket first. With my 3-inch and 1/4 inch spacers in place, I drop the drawer slide on top and keep the front of the slide about a 1/16 of an inch away from the front of the case. I then use a self-centering drill bit to drill a pilot hole and attach the slide with one screw.
After securing the first screw, I use an adjustable square to confirm that the slide is actually sitting perfectly perpendicular with the front face. And because I have this piece sitting on concrete, there's always a possibility that it might not be dead flat, and it could actually be raising or lowering the back of the slide. So I'll just confirm that it's square, use that for reference, and then attach my other 2 screws. And once I attach both of my slides to the case, it's time to attach the adjoining piece to our drawer sides. Fortunately, this is a piece of cake too.
I scribe a line 7/8 of an inch up from the bottom of the drawer. 7/8 of an inch is the distance from the bottom of the slide to the center of the drawer bracket. Now be sure to measure your slides because there could be differences from one manufacturer to another. I make sure the bracket is flush with the front of the drawer. Then I line up my holes and attach with screws.
So now it's the moment of truth. Let's see how this guy fits. Just push the slides into the little plastic guides. And as you push this guy through, the first time you push it in, it's actually pretty tough to push in, so don't get nervous. Just push it all the way until it contacts and registers. Very nice. Now let's weight test it. Yeah, that's 175 pounds of pure Italian man. Now for the remaining drawers, it's very simple. We just add our 1/4 inch spacer and put in our slide. Now if you like the way your drawers look here, you could just throw some handles on there and call it a day. It's just shop furniture, so it doesn't need to look really elaborate. But I personally would like to close up some of these gaps, prevent a little bit of dust from getting in there. And the way to do that is to put on drawer fronts on top of these drawer faces. And the way I'm going to do that is using a single sheet of material. I'm going to cut all of my drawer faces from the same piece. And this way I'm going to have grain continuity from top to bottom, and it's going to look awesome. It's a technique you want to use in any type of furniture that you make, not just shop furniture, and it really makes the piece look that much better. It gives it an amazing visual effect. So let's get started with that.
To measure for the first drawer face, I attach a piece of ply to the bottom of the case. This gives me a stable reference point to measure from. I measure to the top of the drawer and add a 1/16 of an inch. Before I cut my first drawer face, I mark the board with a large triangle. That helps me keep the boards in order. With my first board in place, I add a 1/8 inch shim to the top edge of the drawer face. Now I can measure for my second drawer face. With the second drawer face cut, I can use the same method as before to measure the next drawer. I repeat this measurement method all the way to the top. The result is a bank of drawers with exactly 1/8 of an inch between them.
Now attaching the drawer fronts is relatively simple. You just need to keep everything aligned. I'm going to start with my first drawer at the bottom. I'm going to keep my support board in place because we're going to use that again. And I'm not too careful with the glue here. Okay, put that in place. Center it as best you can. Okay, once you feel you're pretty close to center, I'm going to shoot a few brad nails from the inside. Okay, now you can add more brad nails if you need to. I'm going to use a few clamps to hold this in place and give it about 30 minutes for the glue to dry. Now drawer number 2 is done in exactly the same way. Only difference, we put our spacer here just like before. Put the glue on the back of the drawer here. Line everything up. Now I just line it up with the bottom drawer that's already installed. That looks pretty good. And then once again with the brad nails. Now I'm going to install some simple plywood doors on our stand. I'm going to hang the doors using European style cup hinges. Now this is the ideal hinge for shop furniture because it's strong and it's durable. And installing them is pretty simple too.
Cup hinges have two parts, the cup that attaches to the door and the bracket that attaches to the case. I start by making marks for the bracket on the case. I scribe a line 3.5 inches from the top and bottom, and extend that line to the inside of the case. This is our center line for our hinge. Then I use one of the hinges to establish a reference mark that will show me where the edge of my door will be. This allows me to measure the final width of my door. Plan for an 1/8 inch gap between the door and the bank of drawers. With a piece of scrap clamped to the bottom of the case, I take a vertical measurement for my doors. Now with my door cut to size, I rest it on the support board. I then transfer my hinge center lines to the inside of the door. To attach the hinge bracket to the case, I line up one of the hinges with my center line and slide the hinge all the way until the cup hits the case. Then I pre-drill for my screws. Before attaching the bracket, I disconnect it from the cup portion of the hinge. Nothing to do now but drive the screws and test the fit. Now to attach the cup side to our door, we need to first drill a 35mm hole for the cup to sit in. This can be done with a Forstner bit and a jig. A jig like this is relatively inexpensive and will save you time and energy. I simply line the jig up with my center line and start drilling. The jig has a stop collar on the bit that makes sure the depth is perfect every time. I just drop the hinge in place, pre-drill, and attach the screws. With both hinges installed, it's time to attach the door. If the door doesn't fit perfectly, there are several adjustment screws on each hinge that can really come in handy.
Now we won't get very far without some handles, so I've selected some very simple metal handles, pretty much the cheapest ones I could find, and we're going to attach them to the drawer fronts and the doors.
To install the handles, I mark the center point of the top drawer. Using a large square, I transfer that line all the way down the drawer faces. Then with an adjustable square, I strike a horizontal line at the approximate center of each drawer. Next, I make a quick little marking gauge out of a small piece of scrap. I simply mark the location of the screw holes, and then I measure and mark the center point. All I need to do now is line up the center point of the marking gauge with the center point of the drawer and transfer the marks for my screw holes. Now I just line up my handle, pre-drill, and drive the screws. The door handles are installed in much the same way, only I place my lines 1.25 inches in from the edge and 4 inches down from the top.
So let's take one final tour of our assembly table stand.
This stand is exactly what my shop needed. It looks good, it's sturdy, and it provides lots of extra storage. On the right side, I installed a switch for the compressor, a 25-foot flexible air hose, and a heavy-duty power strip. On the left side, I installed another power strip, as well as a small French cleat storage system. Using this system, I can hang just about anything using shop-made holders made from scrap wood.
So here's our table and our stand together. I think it turned out great. Now, if you want to finish your stand, something as simple as a wipe-on polyurethane will work just fine. But remember, shop projects are a great place to practice finishing techniques. It's also a great place to use up some of that leftover finish that might expire soon. And of course, you could always leave it as is. Now, a stand like this not only provides ample storage, but it also allows you to get creative and add some features that you normally wouldn't expect to see. You could even add specialized storage in each drawer for specific tools, like the biscuit joiner and these brad nailers. Now, you're only limited by your imagination. So I hope you enjoyed our assembly table project, and I can't wait to see what cool ideas you guys come up with for your assembly table and stand. As always, if you have any questions, you can email me directly at thewoodwhisperer@gmail.com. Thanks for watching.